Yeah, I'm Charlie Bexfield. I'm from GEMA. I'm one of their tutors, and I've been teaching there for coming up for 2 years now. Thoroughly enjoying it, and they've shipped me off here to talk about spectroscopy and how to use the handheld spectroscope. So in the hour today, hopefully all being well, we're going to go through how to use it and what we're going to do with it. There's some gemstones in front of you. For those of you on the back rows, if there's seats available with the stones, you'll find it much more entertaining in the second half with a bag of stones, so feel free to move yourselves around. So a little bit about GEMA. We're the oldest gemological association in the world, and been providing our education for over 110 years now. We're a registered UK charity, so any help is always welcome. In our exams, we've just taken back in January 2020, are in 24 different locations around the world, and we teach our courses in 5 different languages, and it's something we're quite proud of, as we have 43 different teaching centers now globally, and more is happening in the US as well. So keep your eyes and ears to the ground. So what are we going to be covering today? We're going to do a little bit of theory first off. So you're going to cover some basic principles of color and why we see color and selective absorption, which will help us then understand what we're seeing with the spectroscope. We're then also going to talk about lighting, the correct light sources to use and why. Obviously with relation to the spectroscope, if you use the wrong light source, you're not going to do too well. I'm then going to tell you why to use a spectroscope. I think it's a wonderful piece of equipment. It fits in your pocket and it tells you what the stones are, which is always a good start. And then there's a few little tips and tricks, how to use it and how to get the most out of it. So we're going to run over some of those as well. And then at the end, when we go through the stones, we're going to look at some diagnostic spectrums so we can learn how to identify these materials. So in front of you, you've all got a pack of gemstones, a little handout with the diagnostic spectrums in, and hopefully a torch and some spectroscopes as well. So first off, I suppose we need to understand what spectroscopy is. Well, it's the science of analyzing the interaction of the electromagnetic spectrum as radiation within a material. Okay, and the bit we're interested in is the handheld spectroscope today, and that's only using the visible light spectrum. And the visible light spectrum, the electromagnetic wavelengths between roughly 400 and 700 nanometers. And they're the wavelengths that the human eye is able to see. And some gem materials absorb the energy within this spectrum, and is what we can then pick up and perceive through the spectroscope, and that's why it works for us. And light energy is all of those waves, and that's all color. So if you see all 700 nanometers at once, you're just viewing white light. As you take out or add in different wavelengths, that's when we start to perceive color. So color, what causes color? There are a few reasons why we see color within a gemstone. It's crystal field theory, which is probably the most common, molecular orbital theory, band gap theory, which is predominantly your diamonds, and then physical properties theory, which is a scattering, diffraction, etc. But all of these things, maybe bar physical property theory, cause general absorption within the material. And it's that general absorption, or in those absorption bands, that we can see through the spectroscope if it happens in the visible spectrum, and that's what we're interested in, because that's what's going to help us identify our gemstones. I'm not going to go into too much detail with each bit, because frankly it's a bit boring, and I think we're here to look at the spectrums rather than try and learn too much about them. And so the main transition metals, these are the coloring elements that you find in most gem materials, and this is the chart we give our foundation students when they start studying with us to understand what elements generally cause which colors and which materials. And that's useful because it can help you work out where you're supposed to be seeing absorption bands or emission bands in certain materials. So I think most of us probably know rubies colored by chromium, sapphires colored by iron and titanium. And because of these different absorptions, different coloring elements, they produce different absorptions in different parts of the spectrum. So for example, chromium will generally produce absorptions in the red end of the spectrum, whereas your iron on the whole produces absorption in the blue-green part of the spectrum. So knowing what's coloring your gemstone can be helpful. At the bottom there, you've got boron and nitrogen, which obviously aren't metals. And that's your band gaps referring to, and they're the coloring, they're the reasons and cause of color in your diamonds. So those elements cause the gemstone to selectively absorb. And you have two types of gemstones. You have idiochromatic and allochromatic gemstones. Idiochromatic gemstones are self-coloring, and that means that the coloring element inside that gemstone is a key factor to the chemical composition of that material. If you take that coloring element out, it's no longer the material it said it was. It must have it as part of its constituent to be that material. Whereas your allochromatic gemstones, for example, corundum, has impurities inside the structure. And it's those impurities that then cause the absorption in the color, as I just mentioned, it's the chromium for your ruby. So how does it work? If you have your 400, 700 nanometers, every nanometer there shining down at the material, if you've reflected off a white piece of material, every wavelength will be reflected back to you, and that's why you see white light. If you have, here's an example of a blue material. Yes, sir?
Now, when you say white light, are you talking about transparent stones or a colorless stone or white light?
This would be a colorless stone, a transparent or opaque or translucent. It will work for all. It applies to all of them. So with your blue material, as you can see, all the other wavelengths have been absorbed. And then you have the blue wave is reflected back to your eye, and that's the reason why you perceive the blue color, because it's the only one that isn't absorbed and is returning back to you. Okay? And then black is every wavelength has been absorbed. So you can apply all this to the gemstones as we move on. And generally speaking, when you're looking at this, I mean, these are general rules. There are obviously anomalies to most of these rules, but this is the easy way I remember it. The color that's absorbed on your color wheel from when you did art at school, it's the opposite side of that color wheel is generally the color that you're going to perceive with that gemstone. So if you absorb the green section of the gemstone predominantly, you may have other small absorption bands in there, but if the main part of the green is absorbed, you get a red stone. So here you have a ruby spectrum, and you can see quite clearly that the entirety of that green is absorbed. Yes, you've got a few bands in the blue, and a couple of fine bands in the red as well, but it's that green, the main part of that spectrum, the green is absorbed, producing that red color. Same thing applies for spinel. It's a very similar spectrum to ruby. I think you'll note the only two differences is these two bands in the blue here don't occur in your spinel spectrum. This is a paste colored by gold. And the only absorption band here you have is this sort of medium of general absorption of the green. Again, obviously producing a red gemstone. A slight anomaly is, again, a piece of paste. This is colored by rare earth elements, and it's producing, you can see these bands here in the yellow-orange. If you can see this slightly fainter band here in the green, that's actually contributing to the color of the stone as well. So sometimes it doesn't have to be the entirety of that color absorbed. It can also be due to the intensity of that absorption band as well. So why do we need to know this? It's these absorption bands from the coloring elements the reason we see the color. So as I just explained, knowing which elements is beneficial to knowing where you expect to see these absorptions. And if the absorption is strong enough, you'll see it with the spectroscope. There are absorptions in materials that aren't strong enough that you won't see with the handheld spectroscope, even if it's in the visible light range, which is worthwhile bearing in mind. So not all gemstones, not all colored gemstones produce a spectrum, nor do not all colored gemstones produce a diagnostic spectrum. But the ones that do are the ones we're interested in, they're the ones we're going to look at. And even when you're trying to identify material, I think we all realize that it's cutting down, breaking down what the material could be, and sort of before you come to the end result. So even if you use a spectroscope with a material you think is a ruby, but it doesn't give you a spectrum, at least that's helpful, because you know it's definitely now not a ruby because you haven't seen the spectrum, and you can go on and do something else to try and work out what that material is. Sorry, I was clapping next door. The patterns I say can be diagnostic, and the different coloring elements have similar patterns as I just mentioned. So the light sources, which ones are important? The only light source you can use accurately for spectroscopy is an incandescent light source. So that's tungsten, that is xenon, halogen, or candlelight. And so for this, candle's probably not ideal, but it is incandescent. Your fiber optic lights, your mag lights are very good, and you can get these in different sizes and different strengths. And the brighter the light source, if you think of light as energy, and you're pushing the energy through the gemstone, the more energy you have, the better chance you have at seeing a spectrum. So in front of you, I have a little mag light. They're pretty nifty for spectroscopy, for walking out and about. If you're at home at your desk, at your bench or whatever, there's a fiber optic at the front if anyone's having absolute difficulty, and you're more than welcome to come and use it later. But I'd recommend 9 times out of 10 just using a fiber optic. You have that extra energy, and it makes it much easier. So what does it look like then when you're looking down the spectroscope? Here is the larger image is a diffraction grating image. I'll come on to the different types of spectroscope shortly, but you can see quite clearly you have each color broken down: violet, blue, green, yellow, orange. The orange is a little bit blurry, sorry, the photograph isn't projecting nicely, and the red as well. And then below you have a diffraction grating image, but you can see there's absolutely no absorption in those spectrums, no absorption bands or emission bands. That's what you want. Start with that and then go on and put your gemstone in the way. The rest of the light sources that you don't want to use, LEDs. So down the bottom here, you've got, these are LED lamps that, the desk lamps you use for grading, for color grading diamonds or what have you. They're absolutely no good. They can also be fluorescent light sources, and they're no good either. Any sort of flat lamps, your phone torches, they're no good. That's all LED. And LED has a large section of the blue and the red missing, so you don't get a full spectrum. When you look at the source, it looks as though there's already absorption. Sunlight gives you a rare earth element spectrum, so it's already got absorption bands in it, no good at all. And fluorescent lighting is fluorescent, so it has large quantities missing. And when you're looking down the spectroscope, what does that look like? Up top here, you've got the fluorescent light source, and you can see these are emission bands. So rather than absorption, which is the absorption of energy, emission is the re-emission of energy as light from that material. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in a minute. That's absolutely no good. Write that one off. Bottom left is your LED, and actually it's not looking particularly clear here, but this is an absorption band here. And that blue band, sometimes it's not narrow as it is on the board, sometimes it's broad and takes up a lot of the blue. You can have a go with your cell phones or mobile phones in a minute with the spectroscope. And then to the right here is your rare earth spectrum, and you can see these fine bands. They are fine, but they're there, and they can absolutely confuse the spectrum. You've got some in the green here, you've got one in the blue there, and there's some in the yellow as well. And it's those absorption bands that make daylight no good for spectroscopy. So I used a spectroscope, a digital spectroscope, to show you the different light sources. And up here is the LED. And what you'd want is everything to be pretty equal. And you can see that there's a huge chunk missing of the blue. So that looks like absorption down the spectroscope. It's not. It's just that those wavelengths are missing from the light source. And you can see the red is missing quite a lot too. Up with your fluorescent lighting, there's loads missing, which you can see. It's predominantly strong in the green and the orange. Your incandescent light source is the one you want to use. As much as you've got a much more energy in the red, you can see that every single wavelength is there, and that's what you're looking for. And then here is unfiltered daylight, which is predominantly strong in the blue, but you can see here all these little dips here, that's all absorption. So again, as I just explained, no good. Stick with your incandescent light sources for spectroscopy. So fluorescent lighting or emission lines, these are important in gemstones. If you do see an emission line in the red, that's fine. If you see an emission band anywhere else in the spectrum, okay, it's probably the overhead lighting that you're using somehow interfering with that spectrum. So ignore it, move yourself position, shield what you're looking at, and move on. But why do we see emission? What happens is, again, as I was explaining, think of light as energy, and that energy excites electrons in the atom, and it makes those electrons jump to what we call like a high energy level or high orbital level. And once it's there, it's used up the energy to get there, it then needs to come back to its original ground state. And as it does that, that energy needs to be expelled somehow and used. So ordinarily, that energy is re-emitted as heat. That's the most common thing that happens. However, sometimes that higher energy level is re-emitted as light. And when you see light, it produces these emission bands. And you can see emission bands in a lot of chromium or vanadium-bearing stones. So ruby commonly has an emission band. Spinel, red spinel commonly has an emission band. Synthetic color change sapphire, vanadium also causes emission bands as well. So it's worthwhile knowing, and if you do see them, they're likely to be in the red. I've got a ruby in the packet, and you can have a look at them momentarily. So I've just explained this, haven't I, without clicking the clicker, beg your pardon. As you can see, this is the emission band here on the ruby spectrum, right here in the red. And you've all seen the fluorescent lighting anywhere else. Just write it off. Move. So handheld spectroscopes and how they work. We have two types of spectroscope, the prism spectroscope and the diffraction grating. The diffraction grating is the one I'd recommend using the majority of the time. As you saw previously with the images, it has each color divided up pretty much equally into each section. The blue section's a third, the green section's a third, and the red section's a third. And for most spectroscopy, that's useful. The prism spectroscope, however, extends that blue section out a bit further, and I'll explain why in a minute. And it bunches up the green, the yellow, orange, and the red into the other half, which sometimes is unhelpful. So if we start with the prism spectroscope, you have a slit which focuses the light, which then comes through a lens, which magnifies it into what we call the prism train. And these will be optical glass, and you normally have 3 or 5 prisms all stacked up against each other, and a prism causes diffraction. You then have the eyepiece, which you can focus by sliding the tube. The ones you have in front of you aren't focusing, they're already pre-focused. If you want to use a focusing prism spectroscope later on, you're welcome to. They're just at the front. I have 4 of them with me, so if you wouldn't mind sharing, that would be much appreciated. And this is what the spectrum looks like and how it's produced. You can see, as I was just explaining, that blue section, the violet, is really spread out, which is useful if you're trying to look for bands in the blue. So if you have a chrysoberyl, it can be helpful. If you have jadeite, it can be helpful. Even ruby, trying to differentiate ruby from spinel. Those 2 little bands in the blue is what does it. Use one of these spectroscopes and it stretches it out, makes life a lot easier. So dispersion, what is dispersion? Why does this spectroscope work? It's the splitting of white light into the spectral colors when the light passes through 2 inclined surfaces. Or this can be facets on gemstone, which is the reason why I see fire. Or in this case, it's the prisms on the material. And what happens is the white light enters your prism, it's refracted, and as it refracts, the light is split. And as it leaves the gemstone, again, it splits some more. And the blue, remember it, where we teach it, blue bends best. So blue light or violet light diffracts more than red light. It has a higher energy. So therefore, it causes it to diffract more than the red light. And this causes a problem with the spectrum, which is why you have more prisms stacked together. And then, as you can see here, this is your white light entering the material. And because you've got those prism trains stacked together, what they're trying to do is rearrange that light so it comes out in a straight line rather than bending. And by stacking those trains together, that's exactly what it does. But because you've got multiple prisms, it spreads out the blue side of the spectrum. Have a go with them in a bit, see which one you prefer. Personally, I use the diffraction grating spectroscope 99% of the time, but it's worthwhile entertaining the idea of using this occasionally. So the diffraction grating spectroscope, how does this one work? Pretty similarly, and really you have the slit, you have the magnifying lens, but rather than having that prism train, you have a diffraction grating, which is a thin piece of either plastic or glass with grooves scratched into it, which causes the light to diffract. The same way of when you move a CD around, you see spectral colors, works in exactly the same way. Obviously pop your eye up to the eyepiece. And the spectrum, we can see here, is split far more evenly than the other, which is why I prefer it. It's trying to work out where each band is at what nanometer, far easier when all parts are equal. And here's a diagram. You have the white light coming in, it's interfering with the diffraction grating. It's then causing that light to bend. Those waves are hitting the diffraction grating sort of nose on, if you like, parallel to, and as they hit it, it causes those to bend, and that bending effect is causing the light to split into your spectral colors. This is then focused by a lens. And people say you don't need a focusing diffraction grating spectroscope. Well, I personally prefer it. So again, I've bought 4 focusing diffraction grating spectroscopes with me. If you want to have a go at them later on, they're up the front. Just come and grab one, have a go, pop it back so somebody else can have a go with it as well. So why use the spectroscope? Well, as I explained, I think they're marvelous. It's wonderful. It's small. It fits in your pocket. You can carry it around with you. And it identifies gemstones, a diagnostic results like the refractometer. You know, you're walking around a gem show like Tucson or anywhere else. You don't want to be lugging around a refractometer with you. You know, they're heavy, they're expensive. It looks a bit weird to the dealer when you start trying to test their stones. So if you take your spectroscope with you, it's much easier and tells you, it does the same job, just in a slightly different way. It still tells you what the material is if it's got a diagnostic spectrum. I think that's wonderful. They can be used on set material, they can be used on loose material, transparent, opaque, translucent, doesn't matter. You just change the technique that you're using and it can still tell you what the material is. And I think looking at colors pretty. And looking down the spectroscope, we see the colors, see the absorption patterns. I think some of them are very beautiful, so that's why I use it. The 2 main methods, reflected light and transmitted light. If you're using a fiber optic, generally speaking, I use the reflected technique. I find it better. If you're using a pen torch, I use the transmitted technique. And it depends on the material and how deep the color is. If you have a very deep color material, transmitted light is easier. If you have a pale color material, reflected light is better. And I'll explain why again in a minute. And the lighting technique is everything. If you've got poor lighting technique, it makes it very difficult to see the spectrum. If the positioning of the light and the positioning of your spectroscopes are all peaked on, you're not going to have much of a chance. So getting that right first is crucial before you even start bothering trying to look for any spectrums. Yes?
On the top image, is that light being refracted?
So yes, sorry.
Reflected off the table inside the stone, so it's actually going through the stone?
Correct. Yes, so this is a dark gem cloth. I've got some at the front, but conveniently the tablecloths are black, so I don't need to hand those out. If you want to use one, you're welcome to. This is your pen torch, shining light into it, interacting with the gemstone, and that light's been transmitted up to the spectroscope and up into the eye.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
Before that the reflected was better for which stones as opposed to paler?
So reflected, generally speaking, I find is better for paler material. Yes, and transmitted light is better for your darker material.
Okay.
And the reason, I'll explain in a minute, but the reason why if you're using reflected light, it allows that energy, again, think of light as energy, to interact with that material, ping around it inside a bit more before it shoots it back out to the spectroscope. So that energy has had more chance to interact with those coloring, or whatever's causing the color. So transmitted technique is pretty easy, really. Take your torch, stick the gemstone on the top of the torch, hold towards the eye, pop the spectroscope up. You can touch the gemstone with it, no problem at all. If it's small, just make sure it doesn't pop up the whole of the spectroscope there, pain to get out. And then otherwise, hold it up. You can balance it in place with your finger, peer down, see what you see. It's pretty simple, really. It's not too much to go wrong. It's a reflected technique that's a bit more of a challenge. For when we're starting, we have, with the transmitted technique, we have a handy little gadget we call the SpectroAid. It was developed by one of our students, who is actually now one of our tutors. Her name is Judy Cheng, a fantastic gemologist, but when she was studying, she found spectroscopy very difficult. And I have some of these up the front as well. I didn't have 25, so sharing's caring. And you're more than welcome to use them later on. And what you do is you slide this little gadget over the top of your spectroscope. Well, the little, she uses a little ring of blue tack, yes, that's optional. And what you can do when you're learning spectroscopy, here you have the incandescent light source and your gemstone stuck in a swing arm. So you can look at the incandescent light source with the gemstone out the way, you can then swing the gemstone back into play, have a look, and double check if you are seeing absorption bands or what you are or are not seeing, which makes life very useful. Also, the smaller spectroscopes fit nicely inside the blue tack, so it makes life a lot easier than just some people. I personally don't like this, but some people just stick blue tack on the torch. It gets hot, it gets sticky, it makes a mess, it's a complete catastrophe. Personally, I think just pop your thumb over the one half of the spectroscope, over the light source to hold the gemstone in place if it's wobbling around, and then bring your spectroscope up to it. However, one thing to note is you have a spectrum, you have an iron spectrum in your blood. Your likelihood is you're not going to see it, but it's always worthwhile bearing that in mind if you start seeing a large general absorption in the spectrum. That might be you. So just move your thumb out of the way a little bit, okay? And if anybody's interested in visual optics, I know that's not what we're talking about today, but there's a little cap. If you haven't got the blue tack on, you stick it on. There's a very nice sized pinhole in there, and it is perfect for visual optics. And here's how we use it. Gemstone in play, having a look, not too sure what we're seeing, if we're seeing absorption or not. Swing the old gemstone out of the way, double check, have a look at the light source, swing the gemstone back into play, make sure it wasn't an absorption band we're seeing. Next up is the reflected technique. This is personally the technique, as I say, I use the majority of the time. I find it's better. Even on the only time I really use the reflected technique is if the gemstone is really dark, like a garnet, for example. There's no point. If I find this technique far more difficult than the transmitted with garnets in particular. But what you do is, one thing I don't like about this diagram here is it suggests the torch is wafting out in the distance, your spectroscope's out in the distance, and you're not too sure what's going on. But you really want to get a nice tight angle. So that gemstone's coming down, the torch is coming down, touching the gemstone, illuminating it nicely, and then you put your spectroscope in. So lighting, as I explained, technique is really important. And when you're positioning, I've used a fiber optic just because it was easier for photography, trying to balance a torch, my phone, and the gemstone and everything was a bit problematic. So I used a fiber optic, but the theory and the principle is exactly the same. This is no good. This is a ruby, synthetic, heart-shaped, and here, yes, I'm shining the light source onto the stone, and yes, the gemstone is absolutely absorbing the energy, but you put a spectroscope in there, you're not going to see much because it's also reflecting off a lot of this white light. You can see around the cloth, you've got all the light interfering with what you're going to be seeing, and it's going to be very difficult to see that spectrum. Even here, trying to put your spectroscope in at any angle, you've still got this white light spilling around the edges. That's no good. You're not going to see the absorption. You're just going to see the blank spectrum given to you from the incandescent light source. So what you want to do, is these both work, is can you see we're causing the gemstone to glow, if you like. And that glow is projecting this red color onto the black cloth. That's the money. That's where you want to stick your spectroscope. Here's another example here, and you can clearly see that shadow here, and that shadow is all that red light. And when you put hopefully your spectroscope, I use my finger to prove the point, put your finger in play, you can see all of that red light has been reflected back, well, in this case into my finger, but all being well, that's going to be your spectroscope. And that's the best angle to see the spectrum, okay? So make sure everything's positioned well before you even bother starting to look. That's crucial.
Is it directly above the stone?
So can you see here, you've got the light source almost directly above the stone. It's slightly angled, and the angling's important. So if I go back 2 slides. Can you see here this fiber optic is angled? Yeah, so it's almost the same angle as before, and the positioning of the stone's important, but it's just not casting that shadow in the same way. So what you want to do is cast that shadow nicely so that it interacts with it. So you want the light source touching the gemstone almost at a 90-degree angle on top of it, and it causes that energy to interact inside the material nicely.
Thank you.
That's all right. So a few points to think over. Colorless or white stones can also produce diagnostic spectrums. For example, diamonds and zircons can produce diagnostic spectrum. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a colored material, but you're more likely to get a spectrum from a colored material. On the same vein, as I've already mentioned, not all colored materials have recognizable spectrums or diagnostic spectrums or even a spectrum at all. So have a go, see what you see. If you see something great, if you don't, so be it. Some coloring elements give typical absorption patterns, as I think I've mentioned a few times now, but try and remember them because it does make using the spectroscope far more helpful. Strongly pleochroic stones, I haven't put any in the sets today because sometimes it causes problems, but they can show different absorptions. It'll be the same pattern but different strengths, and sometimes the positionings of the absorption bands will be different down different pleochroic directions. So that's something that's worth bearing in mind when you're looking at the stone, the orientation of the stone. Red stones, glass, you can have different absorption patterns, different materials and relations producing similar colors. Blue sapphires have an absorption band in the blue, even though they're blue material. So it doesn't abide by that rule that we were talking about earlier, where it's the opposite of the color wheel. They also have absorption in the red as well, but we can't see it in the spectroscope, and further up and not in the visible spectrum. So when you're recording your results, what you want to do is break your spectrum up into different parts. And today we're not going to be drawing spectrums. It's not really relevant, is it? We want to look at them rather than draw them, and I think the more we can look at, the better. But for interest, if you are recording your spectrums, you want to, provided using diffraction grating obviously, you want to split your spectrum up into 3 equal parts, dictate which end is which end, because I believe we've now swapped the way we view spectrums around. We put the violet on the left now and the red on the right, and if you read some of the old literature, the red's on the left and the violet's on the right, so don't muddle yourself around. And if it's in the books, just turn the book upside down or with vice versa, and it does the exact same job, doesn't it? So draw a rectangle, mark it all out, and then, as I say, mark the ends. Once you divide the spectrum, once you start drawing the absorption bands, you want it to be as accurate as you can, really, with the size and the position and what they are. And any emission bands, obviously, we can't draw in light, so just draw a band, and then we just label it with a little E, so everyone knows what everyone's talking about. And when you're describing them, be sure to be descriptive. You know, don't just say, oh, there's an absorption band in the red. Well, that's not particularly helpful, is it? Is it a broad absorption band? Is it a fine absorption band? Is it strong? Is it weak? You know, if you're trying to explain to somebody what they're supposed to be seeing, imagine the way you'd want to explain to yourself, so you can understand what's going on. Start from one end and work to the other end. It doesn't really matter which way around you do it, but it's always a pain when somebody's like, oh yeah, there's a band in the orange, and then, oh quick, there's another one in the blue, and then if you go to the red and your eyes are skidding around, you have no idea what's going on and what you're supposed to be looking for. So if you're trying to describe one, I recommend starting with one end and working your way through. This is a metamic zircon, a low zircon, and you can clearly see here you've got a faint, broad band in the blue-green boundary, the fuzzy edges, because the zircon's metamic. You still have, though, this strong, fine absorption band in the mid-red. That's your diagnostic spectrum for your zircon, is that band in the red, and it's at 653 nanometers, and that's what you want to see. And you'll see that in most zircons, and treated or not. And so if you have a heat-treated zircon, you'll find that some of these bands disappear. With your untreated zircons, you can have up to 40 other bands somewhere in the spectrum. I mentioned visual optics earlier. I haven't got the stone with me, but it's at the GEM-A stand if you want to come by and have a look. You can actually sometimes see zircon spectrums just by holding up to your eye and looking at a light source. They're very strong spectrums, which is visual optics. So I think it's time to have a go. I think I've said enough. Has anybody got any questions so far about anything I've said, how to use it? Yes?
I was wondering, do you have a list of the stones that are colored but will not emit the spectrum?
I haven't with me, no. And generally speaking, I think you're more interested in the ones that do have a spectrum. Rather, I am anyway, the ones that don't. So most literature will tell you if it does have a spectrum than if it doesn't. And I always assume if it doesn't, if they don't mention it, I generally assume that it hasn't got one. But it never hurts having a look. So, any more questions on what we're doing, what we're up to? No, great. So if we all take the small little spectroscope that's in front of us, that's your diffraction grating, and take the little box, has your torch in it, open the sucker up, pull it out. To make it work, just twist the top and it turns the torch on, whichever direction it is, clockwise I think. Twist it the way that makes it work. And then hold your spectroscope up to the torch and just have a look down the spectroscope. See what you see, have a look at that spectrum without any gemstone in the way. Yeah, that's your blank spectrum. I always saw the image on the board, but it's always nice to see it for yourself. Great little lights, yeah. They're pocket sized, they fit on a keychain. When you're struggling to put your door key in the door, they're useful as well. Yeah. If we're all dandy with that, and then some of you have your prism spectroscopes in tubes. Some of you have them on your desk loose. With the small ones, pointy end towards the eye. I know it's counterproductive. If you have it the wrong way around, you won't see any absorption at all. So pointy end towards the eye. And then with the ones in the tubes, the larger spectroscopes, your prism spectroscopes, again, feel free to have a look at that down the light source as well and see what you can see. Now we know absorption, but you'll be able to see the difference between the spacing. Yes?
Horizontal lines, is that from speck of dust?
Yeah, so if you see anything horizontal, that exactly as you say, that's dust, just turn it around, give it a sweet, sharp sort of puff into the end of the spectroscope, and hopefully they'll go away. But it won't interfere with the spectrum. Sorry, tape you said.
Which end do you look in?
This end here.
Okay, you look in the tapered end.
Tapered end, yeah, sorry, not tapered, yeah, tapered end. So, in front of you, there's a pack of stones. Each pack's, you have a set number on it. Just ignore that. That's just for me for tidying up later. And then inside, you have various number of bags labeled stone 1 to 5. And then you have set 1 and set 2. But if you could get out stone number 1, that would be tremendous. It's pretty good. I love spectroscopy. I think it's very cool. Get that pink stone out. Have a look at it. Try using both techniques. It has hopefully has a really obvious spectrum, and it shouldn't be too difficult to see. I went around help anybody with techniques. I can just see what. Sorry, sir, I don't know your name, but you're using a white. You want to use a black background, a dark background when using reflected techniques. So don't use the paper in front of you. Stick it straight onto the tablecloth. You'll find it far better. Pardon, sorry?
I didn't want to lose this.
Oh, it's not too bad. Drop stones are a casualty of gemology, aren't they, sometimes?
Pretty evident.
Yeah.
You know, the only problem is that a lot of the stones are already mounted.
Well, I just stick some light through it.
Well, you can't get behind them.
Use the reflected technique. Bit of blue tack, hold it in place, off we go. So for those at the back without stones, you're welcome to go and get friendly with somebody that does have stones and see if they'll kindly let you have a go with theirs. But I only managed to make up 25 packs to put together. But there's a spare seat here. I'm not sure if there's a stone set there if anybody wants to have a go. Get friendly. Sorry, sir, yes. Say again, sir?
Can you put your thumb, your finger over there? Just
Perfect, yeah, no problem. Touch that spectroscope on the stone. You're welcome to touch it onto the stone.
Now I'm getting two little bands in the green.
Perfect.
That's how it.
That's what you're wanting, yeah. You might find it easier taking out the packet.
And how do I hold all three?
So just balance the stone on the torch,
Oh, okay.
and then just bring the spectroscope up to it thereafter.
put
It should be
right
big
on
enough.
here?
Yeah,
Oh.
put it right on. It's not going to hurt it.
Oh,
And then just that's balanced on there. That's not going to fall off.
so what am I looking for?
So you'll find quite a few strong absorption bands. Have a look and see what you see, and if you real struggle. Do you know what I mean?
You sent me the red
Hopefully,
as well.
there should be. There's quite a number of absorption bands. Yeah,
There's like 4 in the green,
lovely. Sounds good to me.
one near the blue, one near the yellow, and then 2 in the
Lovely.
middle.
Perfect. Is everyone seeing that okay? Is anybody having any major issues and can't see anything? No. Good. So all been well then.
Does that mean that's a pink sapphire?
Unfortunately not. No. No. This is hopefully a variant of what we should be seeing. Again, I struggled taking the photograph on this one, but you may have a few bands in the blue. Some of you may have a couple of bands in the red as well. But predominantly, you're going to have the majority absorption around the yellow, orange, green area, yeah? And what you have here is cubic zirconia.
Oh.
Yeah. And this here is, again, the diagnostic spectrum for cubic zirconia, colored by neodymium. And it's synthetic, yeah. And this is what we call a rare earth element spectrum. And if we just recall back to when we looked at that piece of red paste at the beginning on that color wheel, and you had the that rare earth element red glass, and it had a pretty similar looking spectrum, yeah? The absorption bands are in the same place. So that's where I'm saying knowing what your cause of color is really useful, and it can help you whittle it down as to what the material is. But you can see, yes, it's colored by the same element, but still the absorption's different. The way, the positioning of them, the strength of them, how many there are, the width, etc. Okay? Has everyone seen that? Is everyone comfortable that can see you've tried both techniques, you've worked out which one works better for you for that stone? Gravy. Let's have a go with stone number 2. Pull the puppy out. This is hopefully roughly what you should be seeing. So I've tried to give you the way I've worked it out. Done 2 easy ones for the first 2 medium ones, and then a slightly more difficult one. I thought that seemed like a good way to go about it.
Number 2, the 1 stone?
Yeah, it just says, it says stone 2, I think, on the packet. It should be blue. Go for the blue one. Oh, you got 2 number 2s? Oh, hellfire. Have you?
Single stone 2 and 2.
Well, that's exciting. Oh, sorry, that's set 2, not stone 2.
Oh, so
That's all right.
Oh, okay.
So this is another pink
We're looking at
stone.
stone.
Sorry. You have a packet that says stone 2, which is a blue stone. There's also a packet that says set 2, which has 2 red stones in it. I'll leave the 2 red stones alone for a minute. We'll come on to those momentarily. Sorry.
So I don't know if it's the dark light, but it doesn't look blue.
I'll turn some lights on. Yeah. There we go. Pardon?
It says
Oh.
purplish red oval on the slide, which is what it is. It's not blue.
Oh, I beg your pardon. You're right. You're absolutely right. Go for what it says on the slide. Go for that purplish red oval, as it says on the slide. Sorry. The blue's the next one. That's exactly what it's supposed to be. Sorry, no. It's stone 2, which is the purplish red. Beg your pardon. The blue one's the next one. I confused myself.
We're on stone 2.
It's a red one.
Yes, it's red. Sorry.
It's okay. No problem.
Again, my stone's modelled up.
So we should be seeing a dark right at the green towards the...
Yeah, so all being well, we should all be able to see three absorption bands, or 3 predominant absorption bands. One's going to be on the blue-green boundary, which is going to be stronger. You'll have one next door to it, which isn't going to be quite as strong. And then you're going to have another absorption on the sort of green-yellow boundary, yeah? Some of you, if you look carefully, you might find a band in the blue about here. It's possible. And I think if you want to see that band in the blue, I'd recommend using the transmitted technique over the reflected technique. We all managed to see that? All being well? Anybody having any issues? No? Good-o. So what do we have is an almandine garnet. No, it's not a blue stone at all. And this is coloured by iron. And do you remember I was saying iron normally absorbs in the blue? If you take a peridot, for example, you find you have 3 bands bunched up in the blue. And the way I think of an almandine garnet spectrum is very similar to that, but it's just stretched out. So you've got those 3 bands are still there, but it's just stretched out a bit more. So the different little tips and tricks can help you remember these spectrums. And that's the idea. You want to try and remember them, because the more you remember, the more gemstones you can identify with this technique.
What does the one in the blue mean? I just found it.
The little fine band in the blue, it's just another absorption band from the iron spectrum.
And that identifies the type of stone?
Yes, that tells you you have a garnet. So one thing I will say, these are almandine garnets, but it can be pyrope garnets can also show a similar spectrum to this as well. So pyrope-almandine garnets can show the same spectrum. Yes, sir?
Doesn't the Australian heat-treated sapphire have a pretty strong band, real strong diagnostic band, about 400, 460, something like that?
Yes, can have up to 3. It's about 460, 470, and 450.
Okay, it's real sharp line, right?
It is. Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So if you walk up to stone number 3, if you're finished with stone 2, feel free to push on to stone 3. So it's a bright pinkish red stone. I think we've seen this spectrum a few times before, already today. So what I'd say here with this one is have a look with your diffraction grating spectroscope as you would ordinarily. And you're going to hopefully see that lovely straw emission band. You're going to see a nice general absorption of the green. No problem at all. But finding those 2 bands in the blue is somewhat of a sod sometimes. They sort of like to try and hide. So if you use the prism spectroscope, stretch that blue out, it makes seeing those 2 bands in the blue far more easy. And that helps differentiate between the spinel, which doesn't have those 2 bands, if you only have a spectroscope. Yeah? So try both with this one. Yeah. Say again? Yeah, of course. There's a... Come and help yourself, take out what you want. So the light source you're using here, that's an LED light source. So if you look at the spectrum with that, you'll see a bit of the blue missing, unfortunately. It would be beneficial.
The database
Pardon, sorry?
for this.
Yes.
What is the database here?
For me, it's here. Yeah.
Really?
But you get books and things, and for you, it's in here as well. Yeah. No, I put 12 spectrums in the pamphlet for you. But yeah, there's more and more. There's lots and lots.
So where can we get the spectrums? The different? Do you have?
So a book by OPL, which is I'd recommend start to go. It's a very good place to start.
Okay.
That's where I learned most of my spectroscopy. So it's a great. The 12 I put in here was the 12 we teach for our foundation course, and it works nicely. You know, it's the 12 you're most likely to see out and about.
Right.
We add some more info. We added another, I think it's 8 for the diploma course. And then, but there are hundreds of spectrums. Say again, sorry? This one as well, yeah. So sorry, I think you might be one between 2 here.
Okay.
Thank you.
That makes a lot of sense.
Maybe one of the things like is lost because I'm just looking through. Did something fall? It worked fine for the first one, and now all of a sudden it's just.
I saw the first.
What do you mean by full? No, it's a clear
It's all
spectrum.
together in that, because it's all of a sudden just seeing through and seeing the stone, like without the spectrum. It's weird.
But
What am I doing?
I don't know,
It was worked perfectly.
the spectrum's okay. Where's your stone? This it?
There's one. And you want that to be pin light as much as possible, right?
Yeah, so you can just
Yeah.
focus that kid out if you want. Just stick it on.
Oh, I wasn't doing it that way.
Have a go. There you go.
Oh,
It's all there.
I don't know why I was.
All right. And if
I
you
was
want-
doing it from. But it, okay.
Yeah. All happy? So how are we getting on? Is that all good with this one? So here we got our ruby.
So what are we looking at in number 3?
So number 3 is a ruby. Correct. Yeah. One thing I will say, I won't differentiate between natural and synthetic. Yeah, that's where you got to bring your loop into play. But it tells you that it's a ruby, so that's pretty helpful. Yeah, and it's coloured by chromium. Let's say, nice bit of action in the red is your emission band.
Did you say it was natural or lab?
This one you have is a lab. This is a lab synthetic. Yeah.
Nobody's taking it.
No, I'm sorry. These ones really aren't worth taking home with you. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're a charity. Yeah. It makes a big difference. Yes, it really does. So we haven't got anything here in Tucson. We haven't got the shop in Tucson, but you can order them online, no problem.
That's your tool, right?
Well, that's your UV, yeah.
You said ruby at the mall.
Yes. So, they all having to go with that stone number 4. This is your blue stone. The one I thought was number 2. Yes, miss.
Can you show me how to use
Yeah, of course. So you just simply stick that on there like so. We're going to pop that pin cap off.
Okay.
And then, did it have a...
The blue stone right here?
Yeah. So you can just pop that
Inside there?
blue stone in the middle like that. Oh, he says as he just pings it. I don't know where I put it.
Right here. There it is.
Well done. So did your pack have a bit of blue tack in it? No.
The what?
Your pack didn't have the ring of blue tack in it. I wonder if that's gone.
No.
I'm just going to grab you a bit of blue tack. So how are you getting on with stone number 4? It's a bit more difficult, yeah? You just have simply that one band, or maybe 2 bands in the blue. It's going to be quite broad, quite sharp, quite fine. So again, you might want to start off with a diffraction grating, but because it's just one band in the blue, the image on the board is from a diffraction grating spectroscope. But as you've all got prism spectroscopes in front of you, you may find it beneficial to use the prism because you've got that band in the blue and it'll stretch out the blue section and make it easier to see. So, yeah, you want that.
Is it like a putty?
It's just blue tack,
Oh.
or white tack in this case.
Okay.
You just wiggle it out, make a donut. Yeah, stick the donut in the swing arm. Make sure you've got a good enough, oops, poke it through the other way. Make sure you've got a good enough hole for the gemstone. He says. Not doing a very good job there, is he? Yeah, to hold the stone in place. So once you've got your ring, stick that on top. Where's your gemstone?
Right there.
Stick your gemstone in the hole of the putty. Then when you swing the gemstone in place, it keeps it illuminated, but if you can't see the band, you can swing it out. Sorry, it's not in your eyes. Check the spectrum. Swing it back in, swing it back out, swing it back in.
Neat.
Yeah? Cool, so what do you reckon this one is? I think you've all got your little books in front of you. I should tell you what it is. Sapphire, yeah, exactly. And just the gentleman said, I think these are most probably Australian. Coloured by iron and titanium. So stone number 5. This one's going to be more difficult. It's a sort of vivid blue and pale. Some of them quite bright coloured stone.
Charles, is there any way that you can broaden the actual colour, spectrum?
Oh, on a spectroscope? No, not really. You're welcome to try a focusing spectroscope. So you can focus. So you can. So this is a focusing diffraction grating, but you can move and you can focus on different parts of the spectrum. So you can slide the tube.
See more of a color?
Absolutely. It will sharpen the bands up for you if you're struggling. That's a pleasure. So this one's probably the most difficult.
Oh, thank you.
That's all right. We said the best till last. Oh, some. Maybe it's not so bad. If it's not so bad, fantastic. We are succeeding with the spectroscope as planned. It will just be that one band in the red. And I mentioned earlier, this band's going to be positioned at 653 nanometers. And therefore, we have a zircon. And in this instance, it's a pale blue, quite a strong color. We have a heat-treated zircon. Okay? As I mentioned, it's that heat treatment that removes the other absorption bands. And the one I photographed here, sometimes the heat treatment doesn't take away all of the bands, and the one I photographed, you can see there's still an absorption band, 2 in the orange, and there's still a little bit of absorption of the blue. Yeah? But generally speaking, with heat treatment, it takes away all of them and just leaves that one band at 653 nanometers behind. Okay? So can we all see that? Yeah. I'm not looking at them, it's wonderful for me. Really easy up here.
So if it was an unheated blue, what would we see?
So if it's an unheated, if it's heated colorless, you'll still see that one band in the blue. If it's natural unheated, you can see up to 40 other strong to faint bands.
So would that be an indication when you don't see too many bands that the stones are
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Wait, can you repeat what you said?
So if it's untreated, you'll have up to 40 other bands somewhere in the spectrum. They can be broad, they can be fine. So it's an indication of not treatment.
Did you say 4 or 4?
40.
4 is blue.
Yes. It's what happens is it's because it's colored by uranium and maybe thorium as well. Because they're radioactive elements, it causes decay in the structure. So as the zircon decays, those bands become more and more fuzzy, and they're the ones they generally treat. They treat them to the yellow, the blue or the colorless. Yeah. So they're the 5 stones that I thought would be good for practicing with. You've then got 2 stone sets. So we move on to the sets. Grab set number 1. And using the pamphlet I gave you in front of you, and the 2 stones you have, use the spectroscope to differentiate the 2 stones from each other and work out what they are. Easy as that. Can't be bad, huh? Pardon?
Run that by me again.
So take the 2 stones out of set number 1. Use the spectroscope to have a look at each spectrum. Use find it in here. Tell me what the stones are, and I'll have a look at the spectrums. I think I've got 5 minutes, so we'll see if we can get around to set number 2 as well.
Did you do this for your GIA class?
Do we do this for our classes? Yes, we do. Yeah. Pardon, sorry?
I said I did 2 years ago.
Yes, yeah. So these are the spectrums. So the 12 spectrums we have in the book, I put in the book for you, the 12 we teach our foundation students. And they're the 12, as I've explained to some of you, that you're probably going to need an out and about. But there are loads more. And it's worthwhile, I say, committing these to memory. They're not, highest in them as pretty patterns, so I think it's quite nice to try and remember them. And then the spectroscope becomes very helpful. That little gadget, you put it in your pocket, put it in your handbag, put it in your purse, wherever else you want to put it. And it's pen torch, carry it around with you. It's a wonderful little piece of equipment.
You call it a torch, nobody here does.
Oh, what do you call them? Flashlights, sorry. Is that right, flashlight? Lovely.
Not a torch. We saw there was a torch.
Stones the same?
They're not the same, no. So these are the 2 spectrums you should be seeing. They're very similar. They're very similar. And the reason they're so similar is because they're both colored by cobalt. So you'll notice in one of them, it's a synthetic spinel, and you have a broad band in the red, in the far red, a broad band in the mid red, and a thin band in the yellow orange. So we say that as thick, thick, thin, sin, spin. Synthetic spinel, little whatever you call it, rhyme, I suppose. Yeah, thick, thick, thin, sin, spin. Nice way to remember it. That's just a synthetic spinel. You then have your paste. Okay, you have a thick, thin, thick absorption bands, and it's those thick, thin, thick bands that is your cobalt blue paste, and we call that the cobalt blue sandwich. They're very similar, but the thicknesses of those bands are slightly different.
So one's a glass and one's a spinel?
Correct. One's glass, yeah, and one's spinel. Oh, paste is a man-made glass, sorry. It's glass, beg my pardon. We all succeeded with that? Yeah? I got some going on. What does mean? Almost, okay, jolly good. Jolly good. And then, if you've succeeded with set number 1, feel free to jump on to set number 2, which you're probably going to find slightly more easy. I thought it would leave on a winning note. And then you have a set of 2 red stones, and they're both paste. Okay? And they're both colored by different elements, which is why you get 2 different spectrums, even though they're both glass. So one of them is colored by selenium, where everything is absorbed except for the red. And that's a really, really easy one. That's nice. That hits you in the face. It's wonderful. Yeah. And then the other one is colored by gold, and that's just one broad general absorption band in the green. We all manage that? Good, good. I'm not in a rush, so you'll take that. Oh, okay. Yeah, you're right.
It's difficult between holding the little stones
And juggling with it all.
and dealing with the vision.
Yes, yes, it is. So,
Why you like this one?
yeah.
I'll look and see which ones I have at home.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I have.
No, I think it's wonderful. And if you get I'm coming back to you.
With some kind of twisted Twilight
And
Zone.
feel free to have a go with the focusing prism. So this is a focusing diffraction grating. So it's the same as this, but you can focus it to your own eye. I think they're wonderful. All good? So I hope that was helpful for you all. That pretty much sums up spectroscopy in a nutshell for an hour. Obviously, there's a bit more to it, and I recommend going away and practicing as much as you can with it. That's the bottom line. And it's a really fantastic book by OPL. It has many spectrums in it. It has, as I've described to you today, different techniques about how to use it, different types of spectroscopes. The handout you're welcome to take away with you. If you wouldn't mind leaving the stone spectroscopes and all the other bits, I would really appreciate that. I can then continue teaching doing the seminar again. If any of you are around tomorrow afternoon, or the GEMA, or evening even, 6 o'clock, the GEMA Big Bash, you're all welcome. It's good fun. There's food, drink, gemologists. We'll let our hair down. If you go onto Eventbrite and register, we'll be very grateful. But if not, rock up, 6 o'clock, 6 till 9:30. It's always a good hoot. Sorry, the Scottish Rite Cathedral. That's a good place to start, isn't it? Just turn up. That's where it is. There we go. Our journals are available online if you want to have a read of them. And if anybody wants to come and chat to me further about spectroscopy, I'm going to be at the AGA stand, table 29, in the Galleria.
Can we go back to the book thing?
Go back to the book thing. There we go. at the front, we've got business cards for the shop and business cards for the education, both of which you're welcome to come and nab. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure, thank you.